You know, one thing you hear quite often from anti-gunners is that the Second Amendment is very vague and therefore it's open to interpretation. They're like, well, if the Founding Fathers wanted it to just be carte blanche freedom to own firearms, they would have made it very simple. Well, the Second Amendment is very simple. It's one sentence, and it's not very hard to figure out unless you're being very willfully ignorant. Let's actually look at the amendment and see what it says. What the amendment says is, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. As you can see, pretty simple, pretty straight to the point. Now, a lot of people will try to seize onto a couple of things in that sentence. They'll seize onto that militia, the word militia, saying, see, this is only for the militia. Well, the one thing they don't seem to understand is that every single able-bodied citizen in this country is by default part of the militia, so that would mean it's for everybody. A militia isn't something that you go sign up for and join up and go to boot camp and get issued a weapon, etc. The militia is just the ordinary, everyday citizen called forth to defend their country. So every person, every able-bodied adult is part of the militia. So it applies to everyone. To say it didn't would be sexist, ageist. If you say, well, it didn't apply to older people, well, that'd be ageist. If you say, well, it's just men, that'd be sexist. So if you want to take a sexist, ageist, discriminatory, bigoted opinion of what the militia entails, that's on you, but the militia is everybody. Now, the other term they like to latch onto there is well-regulated. Well, they say, well, well-regulated, that's so vague. Why couldn't they have been more clear? Well, that is very clear. There is a very definitive definition of the term well-regulated. In the 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s, it was a very common term, and it had a very definite definition. That definition was something that was in proper working order and could function as expected. That means that if a militia was called up, if they were well-regulated, that means they would be able to perform the duties of a militia. And since a militia is just ordinary, everyday citizens called up to do battle for a cause, all they would have to have is the means to do battle. So for them to be well-regulated means they would have to be armed, because that's what's important for a militia, is that they be armed and they be able to meet force with force. So a well-regulated militia just means every person out there that's able to be called up as part of the militia, which is pretty much everybody, should have access to the tools they would need as part of that militia, i.e. weapons. Okay, now that we've actually established those facts, let's go and look at the amendment once again and put it into words that would be easier to understand by today's standards. Once again, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Let's look at the first part once more. A well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, that's the part we already talked about. In today's terminology, that basically just says, because sometime in the future, the people may have to join together to form a functional fighting force to defend against tyranny, comma. Pretty simple and easy to understand. Now let's look at the second half of that sentence. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In modern day talk, that just means the right of the individual to possess and utilize weapons shall not be limited or regulated by the government. So if we read the Second Amendment in those terms, it would basically say, because sometime in the future, the people may have to join together to form a functional fighting force to defend against tyranny, the right of the individual to possess and utilize weapons shall not be limited or regulated by the government. When you look at it like that, it doesn't seem very vague to me at all. In fact, you don't even need to look at the first part of the Second Amendment to understand the meat of the Second Amendment. It's the second part of the sentence that's important. That first part is just a validating clause. It's like me saying, I think it's important to wear a helmet on a motorcycle. If I want to just say that can stand on its own. But if I want to put a validating clause in front of it, like, because I don't want to die from a serious head injury, comma, I think it's very important to wear a helmet on a motorcycle. That first part of the sentence, it doesn't change the validity of the second part at all. It just tells you why the second part is valid. It gives you an idea, at least one idea of why that second part is so important. Same way with the Second Amendment. So is the Second Amendment vague? It isn't vague at all. You can try to make it vague all you want with your disingenuous claims and your false information, but the Second Amendment itself is very clear. It basically says, Because governments tend to go rogue, the citizens may have to someday fight back against their government. And because they may have to fight the government, that government shouldn't be able to limit what tools they have when the time comes that they have to do so.